What's up, everybody? What's up, everybody? It is that time for y'all to check in with the Urban Collective Show. It is your first lady, Ms. Bernstein Truth, alongside yours truly.
It's your man NIC. How's everyone doing out there?
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been on air. So, for those of you who don't know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the Urban Collective Show has taken the opportunity to really put that into full practice. I think oftentimes we talk about acknowledging certain elements of life, whether it's mental health awareness, sexual assault awareness month, et cetera, but we don't put it into that level of practice where our actions speak louder than our words. And so as a result of that, TUC has taken some time to really reflect and to be able to process and then to support somebody else's events that have been taking place in our communities around mental health. And so I'll share more about where I was last week in support of mental health awareness on next week's episode. And it will all make sense when I do it then. So, NIC, how have you been doing though? Tell the people.
I'm doing great. I can't complain. Taking it day by day. That's the only way that I've realized over time that I can do this without, overthinking or going crazy, to be honest. So just I wake up, what's there for me to do today? Okay. I try not to think too much about long term and what's going to happen in 6 months? What should I be doing in the next 90 days? I have a lot of stuff that I should be thinking about, but if I do, I'll go crazy. So I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? Are we still going to be in their lockdown? Work. How's that going to happen? So I'm like, you know what? Day by day. That's it.
That's all we can do. It's true. No, it's true. It's like we have to really pace ourselves. I think it's interesting too, because the governor officially announced on the 18th of May that we are going to start reopening up Massachusetts and really taking into account the progress for just again, like business sustainability, economic growth and development within Massachusetts, which is like a really big step for us. He issued out a 4-phase open up for Massachusetts.
Yes.
Phase 1 is the start. Phase 2
that started yesterday on the 18th. Phase 1.
Yep. And then we're going to have phase 2, which is called cautious, phase 3, which is vigilant, and then phase 4, new normal. I think it's interesting I just want to highlight a couple of elements that really stood out to me for all of the phases that I really want the collective to be very mindful of as it impacts all of us and the ways that we interact with each other, right? So phase 1 is really an opportunity for essential businesses to be open. We know what essential workers have been doing, right? Showing face in the hospitals, in our communities, in our grocery stores, and similarly for businesses. So this is really providing an opportunity for restaurants to also open up their doors a bit. I think that they started talking about hair salons and barbers, which may not seem like it's super essential, but it is essential for folks as far as like maintaining their own well-being and state of mind. Construction, manufacturing companies are open, places of worship are open, right? Hospitals, again, and community health centers, things like that. So that is happening. Lab spaces, office spaces, with the exception of Boston, like hair salons, like I said earlier, like pet grooming.
Phase 2.
Well, no. That's still phase 1, but it's gonna happen May 25th. So it's not like it's not like an instant right now. But then they're talking about possibly reopening like Boston space June 1st. But again, I want to highlight that even though the governor has issued out these 4 phases, that the mayor of Boston has also reassured folks. I think later on that day, he also mentioned that while the governor has made his statements, that he still wants to closely monitor what Boston is going to look like. So again, the governor oversees the state of Mass, whereas our mayor is looking out for Boston. And so continue to stay tuned. Phase 2, people get excited, y'all, because this is where that self-care mental health element is showing face. So retail, Phase 2 was the restaurants. My apologies. But phase 2 is about the retail shops, restaurants, lodging, things like that. Nail salons and the spas. I don't know who's trying to go get their nails done right now. I know a lot of people want to do that self-care, but phase 2 is going to be out for a couple of weeks before you see me out there.
Yeah.
Doing all of that.
And I like how we are taking it and doing these step-by-step phases, because if something does happen, we can roll back and say, oh, nope, sorry. And, I've been looking at the numbers. The numbers have steadily been down, been hovering around the 1,000. Today went down below that. Last week it happened a couple of times. So we're going underneath that 1,000 threshold where a daily basis, the number of tests that are coming out positive are less than that. What we want to be around is around the 200s or so, less than the 300s a day. That's
Or
when
the nuns, the zeros, I think.
I don't think we'll ever get there until there's a vaccine. I'm being serious, because it's always going to have that one person who may not know about it or doesn't have the symptoms. And I don't think we'll ever get there till we have a vaccine. But
I think even with the vaccine, things might still happen. But I hear you, right? It's just about regulating it. And so you're right. I think with the phases, it's also helpful. I think this is our way of identifying what some short-term goals are versus like long-term goals, right? So it makes sense too that the third and fourth phase out of this, like the phase 3 is like bars and arts and entertainment, like casinos, fitness in the gym. So for those of you who are struggling with working out at home, y'all, we in this for a little bit longer. Go on those walks, go get a bike, go rollerblade, go swimming in your bathtub. I don't know, but
no carnival.
No carnival.
No carnival.
No carnival. But
I was watching videos. I was like,
in order for us to keep the Caribbean culture and the Haitian community alive, we need to stay away so that we can really celebrate life. So it's just one of those things. And then it's funny because he's like, phase 4 is the new normal. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. I think already we're establishing norms given these circumstances. And I think really right now where people are trying to get more accustomed to is living in a space of normalcy, meaning that you don't always know. And trying to be more comfortable with that. Because I think before it would make people a lot more anxious. And I'm not saying anxiety doesn't exist, but I think for right now, people are like, okay, it's okay that like I might not feel my best right now, or, you know, like I need a couple of minutes. And I think that's a good place for us to be able to be because we're recognizing that it's important to slow our pace down and to be at one with ourselves. But 4 phases, y'all. 4 phases.
Keep practicing social distancing, everyone. Keep making sure you're washing your hands. Do not start to say, oh, you know what? Stuff are reopening back up. I don't need to wear my mask. I can go out and do all these things and be around people that you're not normally, you know, if they're not close family, friends, or anything like that, that you see on a constant basis. Stay away. Keep your distance. That's what we need to do. We need to be very careful, because if we're not careful, it can get back to the way that it was, and we don't want to go back there. So if everybody follows the rules, follows the directions, I think we'll get better. But this is America. You see all the protests out there.
Right. I'm like, peace.
I haven't seen too much in mass, which I'm hoping, which is a good sign. There's been stuff here or there compared to, you know, the other states, Arizona, California, Chicago, all these other big cities that are having a lot of people protest. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
We're waiting on it. But it is that time, folks, of our show where we get to highlight a celebrity guest, somebody who's doing phenomenal work in the greater Boston community that we would like to highlight, shed light on, really talk about their journey, their experience, and the person is getting ready to join us right now. So I'm super excited. Woo, woo, woo. Round of applause.
Welcome.
Hi.
Nia, say hello.
Hi, Bernadine.
Hi, Nia.
Hi, and nice to meet you. Hi. Thank you for having me on.
We're excited to have you. So, Nia, right now what I'm about to do is share a bit about your bio for folks who don't know who you are, and then we're going to jump into some questions and get to chatting.
Okay.
All right?
Cool. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, Nia K. Evans is the executive director of the Boston Ujima Project. Her educational background is in the areas of labor relations, education, leadership, and policy. Her advocacy includes a focus on eliminating barriers between analysts and people with lived experiences, as well as increasing acknowledgement of the value of diverse types of expertise in policy. She is a co-creator along with artist Tamashi Jackson of Frames Debate Project, a multimedia policy debate project that explores the intersection between drug policy, mental health services, and incarceration in the state of Massachusetts. Ms. Evans has a BS in Industrial and Labor Relations from Cornell University and a Master of Arts in Education Leadership, with a course of study in leadership, policy, and politics from Teachers College at Columbia University. She also studied abroad at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, where she focused on international labor relations. I mean, Nia, first of all, you've been around the world with this schooling and this education. Labor relations is like all up in our faces, and I love it, right? Thinking about our market, which ties so much into economics and sustainability and growth. But anyway, we'll jump into all of that. But say hello to the folks one more time as we get started.
Hi, good evening. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on. Now, I know we heard everything in your bio, and that's great, all the accomplishments that you've done. But the collective and we want to know what drives you for your work and your commitment to your work.
Yeah. So I would say what drives me is just really valuing Black people, and ultimately, I would say kind of dreaming of or envisioning a reality when we understand our inherent value. And it's not dependent on what other people say about us. It's not dependent on, what other people think about us. It's not dependent on, resources that other people try to deprive us of, but that we really just kind of embrace and know at our core that as human beings, as people, we are valuable. That's enough, and we deserve to live well. So just speaking of kind of mental health, that we deserve to be healthy and to be well, and we don't have to prove that to anybody. So that's what drives me.
That's real. Thank you so much for sharing, right? So understanding our worth and our value and our presence. So what made you, in your appreciation of people, what made you want to work with the Ujima Project? And can you tell people about what, in fact, that even is? Yeah,
sure. So before I was at Ujima, I was at the Boston branch of the NAACP. So you heard in my bio, I in the past did education work. So education was and is a passion of mine. I felt like I benefited from excellent education from the time I was in preschool all the way through to grad school. So I've always been passionate about education. And when I started to volunteer with the branch in 2013, I started volunteering with them after the George Zimmerman verdict. And so George Zimmerman being found not guilty of murdering Trayvon Martin was just, for me, just untenable. And for me, just kind of, it's funny, I guess, kind of foreshadowing a bit of a moment that we live in today. Like when we look at these protests of people with guns outside state capitals, protesting, having to care for other people's health and well-being, particularly the health and well-being of people that we see who are being impacted the most by this, and that's Black and brown people. Right. So for me, like that type of situation was just untenable. And I became interested. I was learning about stand your ground laws and how that was kind of the defense that George Zimmerman had, and learned that locally, the Dream Defenders, they were doing work to get the stand your ground laws off the books. And so I was thinking, I want to join an effort, a national effort to get these laws off the books. And I learned that it was the NAACP nationally who was doing that work. And so I learned about the Boston branch. And when I first started volunteering, I was on the education committee. And what we were dealing with for the couple of years that I was on the committee were budget cuts. So this is always a conversation, even to this day: budget cuts, for a bunch of different reasons, and not just reasons that reside solely at the city level. But so there wasn't just the issue of budget cuts, but it was also the way BPS at the time was making decisions in light of those budget cuts. So one of kind of our big fights at the time was working to restore yellow school bus service that had been cut as a result of budget cuts. And there was the thing itself. So there was school bus service being cut, but then even more important than that, it was how that decision was made. So a lot of parents were caught off guard. And so if we think about kind of what parents are going through with the pandemic right now, for example, they're trying to figure out if they're able to work at home. They're trying to figure out how they can work at home and homeschool at the same time. If they're not able to work at home, they're trying to figure out how to homeschool their kids. And so you can just imagine like the amount of planning, the amount of just kind of just day-to-day planning. I'm not a parent, so I just don't even think about the day-to-day planning that it takes to be a parent. And then you suddenly learn there's no yellow school bus service for my child, and that throws it all out of whack. I mean, that even puts into different light even the school that you're thinking of sending your child to. Because depending on the distance, the lack of school bus service, all of a sudden it makes those choices look different. So we became really interested in how BPS was engaging parents, and just in how decisions were being made and how parents were being notified about those decisions. So that was when I was on the education committee. When I then a couple of years later, I joined the economic development committee, and that's when Boston announced it was going to put in a bid to host the 2024 Olympics. And so that was huge. That was a major announcement. Immediately, we just kind of said, well, let's look into pros and cons, what this could mean. Because on the one hand, this could mean a whole lot of investment coming into our communities. And this is after years and years and years of disinvestment. On the other hand, we saw what was happening in Rio at the time, which was a lot of displacement as a result of the Olympics. So on the other hand, it could actually make the gentrification and displacement that we're experiencing much worse. When we were kind of reaching out to like Urban League and Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to see, what do you think about this situation? We found out that those orgs didn't know. And so what we saw was that communities of color, they largely just did not know about this decision. So here we have decisions that are made that are impacting people of color. We're at NAACP at the time, so we're primarily dealing with Black people. And we see people just making decisions about Black people and just not including Black people in those conversations, just not including them. And so we said, well, our conversation is going to be different. We're actually not going to take a pro or con stand. We're going to talk about what planning and development should look like in the city of Boston and what the role of communities of color should be. And so essentially what we're saying is we should be a part of these conversations from the very beginning, not after a decision has been made and now you kind of want to roll out a plan and see if we agree with your plan. The minute there's the nugget of an idea, we should be there and we should be part of, providing input into that idea. At the time, there were hearings, there were meetings, community meetings, and NAACP members were basically saying, we're tired of going to these hearings, we're tired of going to meetings. At the time, the Boston 2024 committee was 5 white men. So we're tired of looking at people who we know are not going to listen to it at the end of the day. They're going to go through the motions. We're going to pour our hearts out. We're going to talk about what we believe and think and what we want. And they're going to turn around and do what they want to do anyway. And so I then became interested in what type of mechanism we could have so that we no longer had to do that, so that we no longer had to kind of ask for permission for the things that we wanted to do or wanted to see, or plead our case to people who were not like-minded or not aligned and weren't necessarily thinking about our agenda, and hope that they saw it our way or hope that they were benevolent enough to do the things that we want to see done in our community. And I knew that the city of Boston had, and they still do, a youth participatory budgeting initiative. So with that's an initiative where there's a handful of young people, and I don't know quite how they're chosen, but they basically get to oversee $1 million, and they go through this whole process where they take $1 million of the city's budget and they're able to say, this is what we want this money to go to, to go to. And so my thought was, wow, that would actually be great if that type of mechanism was available to all Boston residents and not just to young people. And so I became interested in participatory budgeting and thinking about what NAACP's role at the time could be in creating a citywide participatory budgeting initiative. I believe in partnership. So I'm very big on partnership. I'm very big on collaboration. In 2016, I became the ED of the Boston branch, and that was the first paid position since the 70s. And I mentioned that just to say, when you're leading an organization, you kind of have to decide what your leadership style, and you kind of go in with the leadership style, then you kind of have to figure out whatever the organization is, what your leadership style is going to be. I've never been the type of person to think that anything that I was doing or anything that I was leading needed to be dominant or needed to be the only thing in the space. I'm very big on partnership, very big on collaboration, very big on seeing who's already doing what, and particularly in seeing if who's doing what well, and then seeing how I can add to those efforts, be a complementary partner to those efforts. And then if no one is doing anything, or if it's not being done well, then feel comfortable kind of stepping into that gap and filling the gap. And so the reason I'm prefacing that to say, when I was at the Economic Development Committee, this is before I became the ED, I was kind of looking around in that way. So I was looking around to see who's doing really good, interesting economic development work. And I had some criteria. So who's doing work that actually allows community members to actually do concrete action, to do more than just talk, to do more than just kind of show up at meetings and plead their case to decision makers who, again, don't really have a relationship with them. And who's doing that type of work. So as I was kind of going around meeting people, talking to them about the different types of work that they were doing, people kept saying to me, what you're interested in, you want to talk to someone named Aaron Tanaka. He's working on something right now that is right up your alley, and I think you'd really be interested in it. So I would say probably after about 5 people mentioned that I should talk to him, I reached out to him, and at that time, he basically kind of had Ujima sketched out on paper. So not a thing. He has vast kind of experience in the finance and organizing realms. So he'd been kind of thinking about how you put these two worlds together for quite some time. And it finally arrived at the point where he felt ready to kind of present something to a public. And so when he told me about it, I was immediately sold. And so this is what he told me about. So this is now getting into what Ujima is. Ujima, the kind of one sentence that I use for it, it's a cooperative economics infrastructure. So at the center of Ujima is a capital loan fund that community members can invest in if they want to. They don't have to, but they can invest in it because it's one of the more accessible funds that are out there. It's a minimum $50 investment. And this is in a world where traditionally, if you want to invest in private businesses, you have to be an accredited investor. So that means your net worth, either one of two things. Either your net worth is $1 million, or if you're working, and that's excluding your primary residence, or if you're working, you're making upwards of $200,000 a year, depending on whether you file singly or jointly. And that's an accredited investor, and traditionally that's who could invest in a private business, and that's for different reasons, to kind of protect people who don't have a lot to lose, but there's also definitely some classes in there, and so you see kind of like how wealth gets reproduced with that model. So with the Ujima fund, minimum $50 investment, and the idea is regular people from our neighborhoods can invest directly through the fund in these businesses if they want to. Not only that, and this is the part that I loved, not only that, people could vote directly on what they want to invest in. And so then that was perfect, because that is what I was already looking for. So as I said, I was already looking for a mechanism that allowed community members to say, I want A, and A happens. And so that's what Ujima is. If you join Ujima, we do have a membership fee. It's $25 annually. If you're a member of one of our grassroots partners, it's $15. If you're a youth, so that's between the ages of 14 and 24, it's $5. If you join Ujima and you live in Boston proper, you are entitled to a vote on what we invest in. And you vote no matter how much you invest. And as I said, you don't even have to invest if you don't want to. And so that was perfect, because, as I said, as we were kind of having the Olympics conversation, and as members were kind of saying, we're tired of going to these meetings where nobody listens to us. At the same time, people were also saying, you know, when we look around our neighborhoods, we see things that we would want to see happen. But by myself, I don't have the resources to make it happen. What I would love to be able to do is kind of hook up with my friends and my family members, put our resources together, and then we can make it happen. And that's what Ujima is. So that was perfect because then I felt like I could then go back to NAACP members and I could say, you know, yesterday you were saying you would love to be able to put together, pool your resources with people, your friends, your family, etc., to bring about a vision that you have. This is a vehicle by which you can do it. So again, you can invest if you want to, you don't have to. But then the next step is you can say, Ujima, this is what you invest in. And we are committed to then kind of carrying out the process to seeing if we can actually carry out those investments.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you so much for giving the historical context too, as far as like your journey goes. You said a number of things that I want to highlight. One is in your role, you created or helped to establish a platform in which you were the first to be paid to do your job, right? Say that one more time. You had a particular role.
So yeah, so and this was actually under the previous president of the Boston branch, Michael Curry. So I started volunteering there at the end of 2013, and then in 2016, I think this must have been I want to say maybe it was his third term as president of the branch. He was planning on stepping down, and he wanted to create some continuity. And so he decided to create a paid position. He decided to create the executive director position so that there would be continuity between him and the next president and the next administration of the branch so that there wouldn't be certain types of work that got lost. And that was the first since the 70s.
And to hear that first since the 70s, right? It talks about again the power of economic investment in our own people and in our legacies and what we want to have. Because again, it's one thing I think in our Black and brown communities too, and Black people, we always want to do for ours, and we're like, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But then we talk about the economic gap, right? And like the wealth gap that exists. It's like we are struggling financially, and then we always are doing favors, or we're always asked to do things for free and to not necessarily invest in each other financially that way. And so to hear that even again since the 70s, in the thousands, that's when somebody got paid for the first time. And then to hear again the evolution, right? Like it speaks to what you're doing. And, you know, in the Haitian community, and I'm sure other Caribbeans and Black folk have it too, but we call it a cop sol, which is like, you know, people put money together and, you know, like, and depending on that time, people get their money taken out. So most times it's like around holidays and things like that. And so I hear that and I kind of reflect back to that reality where you're creating a community of people who understand the importance of pouring into their community at a pace that makes sense for them, right? To be able to have a power and voice. And so thank you again for outlining Ujima and the fact that this is an opportunity for folks to really be in the community and determine where the money in the community goes. And to also hear that again, you are being financially supported to be able to make that happen too is really, really important for our people to understand. So thank you so much for that insight there. You shared a lot more than that, but I wanted to make sure people understood what we're talking about as far as the Ujima Project and the importance of investing in our own people too for the cause.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions I wanted to focus on the Ujima Project is I see that one of the strategies is to focus on good business and real estate. Can you explain to the collective a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So as I said, we are lenders, we're investors. And so we are focusing on investing in businesses and real estate and then other kind of community infrastructure projects. Starting out, we had two primary screens. So one was we want to invest in businesses owned by people of color. And you know, I think that it's pretty self-explanatory why. So we've already been kind of talking about economic gaps. But the second thing is we also have a social impact screen or a positive social impact screen. And so that's where the good comes from, because our belief is, well, if we want to invest in businesses owned by people of color, and we want to do this because we see that there are these economic disparities, there's a racial wealth gap. We see that there is, you know, enduring poverty in our communities. for us, it wouldn't make sense to invest in businesses, even if they were owned by people of color. So even if they were owned by Black people or other people of color, if they were exploitative. So we're not interested in investing in those businesses. So it's not enough just to be owned by a person of color. If you're not paying a minimum wage, we're not interested in investing in you. If you are not, so speaking of, essential workers, right? So if Jeff Bezos was Black, he would get no money from us. Because it's not helpful if you are, he's a trillionaire now, which is crazy. So it's not helpful if you're a trillionaire and everyone else who works for you can't even afford to stay home for a couple of weeks so that we don't have a pandemic. So we're not interested in investing in those businesses. So that's where the good comes from. So what we did was in April of 2018. Is it April? No, yeah, January 2018. We had a 4-month process where we talked with our members, we talked with community members, and we asked them, what do you think would be just, if we think about environmental standards, if we think about standards when it comes to ownership, standards when it comes to workers' rights, standards when it comes to civic engagement, what would for you be kind of like a minimum non-negotiable that you think a business of any size in any sector should be able to meet? And so we did that 4-month process. We had an election for a community standards committee. The late Chuck Turner was one of the people who was elected to be on the committee. So for example, he brought his Boston resident jobs policy experience and wisdom to that body. We had someone from the Restaurant Opportunity Center United on the committee, and they kind of had a no tipping campaign that they were working on at the time. Luis Cotto, who was at Eggleston Main Streets, Alex Ponte Capellan, who's an organizer with City Life Vida Urbana. So lots of Darnell Johnson, who was with Right to the City at the time. So lots of just rich organizing expertise and experience on the committee, where we came up with 36 minimum community standards that businesses have to meet to receive investment from us. So there are things like you have to be at least 50% owned by a person of color. I think you have to be 50% owned by a woman. I think that's one of our standards. I have to double check. As I said, you've got to pay a minimum wage. If you're a restaurant, you can't pay a sub minimum wage. You have to pay the actual minimum wage. You have to encourage your employees to vote. So we have 36 standards, as I said, that you first have to pass, and then you're invited to join our business alliance, and then you're eligible for investment. With the real estate, we want to work on kind of like a progressive developer standard. So we want to kind of find developers who are trying to figure out ways to bring development to our communities without displacing residents, and really try to be creative about how they finance their development and how they kind of create opportunities for historic residents to be able to stay. And so that's the real estate part that we want to try to work with who we would consider progressive developers to say, what are some standards that should apply to real estate?
Wow. I mean, I think when we're talking about the investment of people, property, it makes a difference, right? It makes a difference when we have our own space. It makes a difference when we have a say in what comes in and who and what comes in and out of our own space, right? Being able to, again, like quantify like where our dollars are being spent, rationalize it. You almost don't even have to explain, right? Like the unexplainable. You just know what it is. And it's just like, look, I know our people need this. I'm around our people all the time. I don't need you to study me, to tell me about me. I am me. Exactly. That's why we're here. So thank you again for really thinking about, right, especially in our Boston market, the importance of bringing real estate into these conversations. Because when we talk about financial wealth and financial stability, right, like those liquid assets and investment properties, like in spaces, also make a difference. And when we can own big buildings, we can also determine like, hey, you know what, this used to be a working space, but because our people are struggling, like let's rent it, let's turn it into rental property, right? Let's turn it into a home or something like that. And just again thinking about our community. So thank you for that. Which transitions me for me into my next question for you. more like I'd want to like hear your thoughts on this, because I think part of what we do as a community and as Black people, and I think that there's beauty in it, and I think also challenging it, so I love to hear your insights, is we talk about how Black empowerment is needed, buying and supporting Black businesses is needed. We need to buy back the Black, right? Like all of these things. And in many ways, that's what you've outlined too. Can you talk to us and reflect on what you think some of the great benefits are of doing that, and just reiterating that to the people about like buying and supporting Black in a few words, and like also though the challenges of doing that, right? Because like, for example, the challenge I think about in only buying and supporting Black sometimes is, the truth is sometimes for us, because we don't have a lot of seed funding or financial stability or financial means rather to create or produce, our prices sometimes might be a little bit more elevated than somewhere else in order for us to be able to make means or make a profit in what we're looking to do. And sometimes that means our products might not be the most affordable to every type of Black person, right? It'll still be available to a Black person in a particular economic bracket. So that's something that I think about. So what are your insights on, again, just like solely buying Black and supporting Black businesses, as far as the highlights and the strengths of that, but also, you know, what you've seen as being some of the challenges in doing that too?
Yeah. So, so in terms of some of I appreciate this question. So in terms of, I would say, some of the highlights and the strengths of buying Black, I think this kind of goes back to the notion of how we value each other. So action's important. And I think, you know, we are in America, and you know, my people, by the way, are Caribbean. So my mom's side of family's from Bermuda, my dad's side of family's from St. Kitts. So I do definitely kind of have a global perspective of the world, but I've grown up in America. And so, you know, definitely, you know, feel like we should for sure be having conversations about different places in the world. But in America, you know, we grow up in a society that really just almost at every turn devalues us. You know, we grow up in a society that kind of sends the message that almost everything that we do is wrong or undesirable, not worthy. You know, down to even, you know, when we think about, I mentioned, you know, Trayvon Martin, but when we think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the issue that movement is highlighting, just with regards to police brutality, but and access to police, you know, just our very bodies are considered disposable by the society. And so on that note, I think then a lot of our lives are marked by trying to survive amidst that. So we receive all of these negative messages. We see the resource deprivation in our communities, and we kind of see the outcomes of that. So certain types of violence, certain types of abuse. You know, physically, sometimes in certain communities, things don't always look great. And so then I think a lot of our lives is we're trying to survive, and then we're trying to do more than survive. We're trying to thrive amidst like all this negative messaging, and we also fight back. And so then I think we have a rich history of so many different ways of kind of combating all of the negative messaging. And I think it's important for it to be more than talk. So if we talk about today, for example, right now, so today we say Black Lives Matter, Black Girl Magic, Black Girls Rock, right? So I think we're amazing cultural producers. And it's not to say we don't back it up with action, we do. But my point just being, it's also important that we back up the positive messaging that we believe ourselves, and that we want our fellow community members to believe with as much action and resources as possible. So that's one thing, that if we really do believe Black girls rock, if we really do believe Black is beautiful, if we really do believe Black lives matter, we shouldn't be bypassing what we produce to support what other communities produce. There's a disconnect there. So I think that's kind of like one highlight and strength. It's just it's putting our money where our mouth is, and it's affirming that. But to your point, there are challenges, and it's interesting because definitely, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but this has definitely been mine. I've had conversations with friends where we're talking about buying Black, and then kind of like the first comment is kind of like, yeah, but sometimes the service isn't as good. And so my response to that is, well, I know I've definitely like been a Target, and something sucked, when I went to Target, and I went back. I know I definitely ordered, some chicken nuggets from McDonald's, and it was cold, and that didn't stop me from going back. And so I think for me, it's really important where we put our money where our mouth is when we have those challenges with our businesses, because it's not like they're not there. So it's not to make excuses for them. I think we have to figure out, okay, for sure it's depending on what the relationship is. And I think we try to do this with Ujima. How do we help them be better? Because also trying to understand what the issues are. So there's some you've highlighted already, right? So sometimes things, just have to be more expensive because it has to be a certain price point so that they can stay in business. Sometimes on the other end, the products are cheaper because it costs less, and so then that impacts the experience. And so I think what we want to try to do at this point now in our collective consciousness is to ask ourselves, okay, so what are kind of like the problems that typically arise for Black people, not for Black people, but for Black businesses to be able to provide high quality products or services at an affordable rate. Now, our job is to kind of help them figure that out. In addition to just, purchasing. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Being able to pick one.
Yeah, that's real good. One thing I did want to go back and kind of focus on is, I know you said you guys choose businesses to help and invest in. Are there certain stipulations on what they can spend the fund on? And two-part question. Also, the second part is those first businesses that you chose back in 2016. How has the fund helped their business?
Yeah. So the answer to the first question is no. So one of the conversations that we have internally is when we're in conversation with the business and when we're asking them what they need need investment for, they tell us we need investment for A, B, C, and D. One of the conversations that we've had internally is, if after all is said and done, paperwork is signed, money's in their hands, they spend it on something else, how do we feel about that? Where we are now is we don't want to be so rigid, that it feels like a burdensome process for the business. Because the other thing is we occupy a space where probably the businesses we're investing in, they probably can't walk into a bank and get a loan today. Because if they could, then they would just do that. And so, and it's almost kind of like my response to the Buy Black question, which is we want our role to be, we want to help you. So whatever your challenges are, we actually want to be able to help you to figure it out. For businesses that have no challenges and things that are easy for them, there are already organizations and products for them. They're fine. They can access whatever they need to access all day long. But that's not going to help the bulk of our communities. So all that just to say, we don't want to be rigid. So for us, it would be a conversation. Okay, you said you were going to spend the money on A, B, C, and D. Instead, it went to E, F, G, and H. What's that about? And we would just kind of take it from there. In the instance that something was egregious, then yeah, we would have a problem with that. businesses in 2016. So definitely one distinction that I should make, which is important, is the Ujima Fund, which is the vehicle that we use to invest in businesses now. We launched that in 2018. Okay. So the Ujima Fund was not an entity in 2016. In 2016, we did a pilot where we actually used the Kiva Zip platform. And so we had people going to Kiva, minimum $25 investment. And we said, we want to raise $10,000 from community members. And we raised $10,000 from 175 community members in 3 days. And then we had matching funds from the Working World, LISC Boston, and Boston Impact Institute. So that day, so we had $20,000 to lend out 0% interest loans, because that's what Kiva does. Kiva's platform is 0%. Our loans out of the Ujima Fund right now is not 0%. And I say right now because the pandemic has changed things for sure. And so we're still figuring out what types of adjustments we will make to our fund, if any. But so in 2016, we invested in, or we had people vote on Boat and Bike School, which was a pop and pop bike shop. Fresh Food Generation, which I don't know, I imagine, have you heard of Fresh Food Generation?
The name sounds familiar.
Yes. Okay, you have, Bernadette. I was going to say, they are more, exactly, more and more people in Boston are learning about Fresh Food Generation, for sure. Norma Rosario Catering, and Sydney Janey Design. Boat and Bike Shop has closed. So the owner decided he made a go of it. For a while, he was gonna go into the I think it was the Citizens Bank building, if not that building, right next to it in Upham's Corners. I don't know if you heard about the development that was going there, but it was his plan to kind of go into that space, and he was going to open up a bike shop and a cafe combination. So very cool concept. Last year, he actually decided he didn't want to pursue that. So they have since closed, and we've written off their debt. And actually, Bipul Rai, who was one of the partners at Dudley Cafe, he and his partner Nia K are going to be opening up a community cafe there in that space. Norma Rosario has paid back her loan, and she had gotten a loan because she wanted to work on licensing to kind of be able to expand and try to get into physical space. So she works out of Commonwealth Kitchen now. She's paid off her loan. We were planning a celebration of that before the pandemic broke out. So that's coming. Sydney Janey was still paying back her loan. And we had actually contacted her recently during this pandemic to say, hey, we can write this off if you want. Let us know. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're not going to be pressing you for payments during this pandemic. And so we are going to go ahead and write off that loan. And then Fresh Food Generation. So as I said, you will definitely be hearing more and more about them. They've grown since they were at a brick and mortar in Dot Health Center. They've gotten lots of catering appointments, and so they're really kind of what's the word? Yeah, they're really kind of getting their name known more and more, lots of customers, and really looking towards having a brick and mortar.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that insight too, as far as like all of these local businesses and spaces that many of us might have not even known of, particularly for Fresh Food Generations. Like I know back when I used to work in higher ed, we would get catered food from them all the time because we have to support our businesses and like our local restaurants all to like by any means necessary. That kind of leads me to my next question though. And I want to hear your thoughts on this one, especially given the fact that you mentioned, Nia, that there are some people that received some loan money and some support, and then you've been able to say, like, hey, we can write this off for you. Given the fact that it's also Mental Health Awareness Month, right? In the state of this pandemic, mental health, business sustainability, I think are really much aligned, right? We look at anxiety, stress, people who are in debt, people who are able to manage through this, et cetera. People who are struggling, collecting unemployment, furloughed. I mean, you name it, right? Wanting to take advantage of. People probably are still waiting for. Well, I know that there are still people waiting for the stimulus package who haven't able to take advantage of like EIDL, like a number of other things, but people are also still struggling. So, what are some words encouragement you have for business owners who are navigating through this time to maintain a level of mental health during this pandemic? Any words of encouragement and insight for these folks would be great.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that question. That's a really good question. So I think there are probably two primary things that I'm thinking of, and this is something I've been thinking of myself, which is one, you are definitely not alone. So, you know, I know we hear a lot, and definitely more and more now, which is good, just about how lonely sometimes or isolating an experience being an entrepreneur can be, particularly depending what stage of the journey you are. You know, so definitely you're starting out. You know, you're passionate, you're trying to get an idea off the ground, you're trying to get people to buy in. It's stressful, it's lonely. And then I would say later on down the line, if you're established, now you've got people working for you. So definitely during this pandemic, for example, worried about the welfare of your employees in addition to yourself and your business. And so I think one thing that's super important is to not hopefully to not feel lonely or isolated. And I would say if you're without a network's important. So NIC, when you were kind of asking about the good business and real estate certification, and I was talking about the business alliance. You know, I've talked about investment, and we've been talking about investment. But the other thing that's important is we also work to provide other supports. And so that screen that I talked about is for our business alliance, and the business alliance is a peer network. That's one of the things that's supposed to be. So it's a space for business owners to come talk to each other about their challenges, learn from each other. And that's important because that's one of the things that I've been thinking of during this pandemic is the resources that we've been able to direct towards the people at the businesses in our network. We're in coalition with BEFMA, who has their business membership body. And so businesses who are members of that organization they have someone in Shagun who is thinking about how to direct resources to them. Also in coalition with Foundation for Business Equity with Glenn Lloyd, who has businesses that he's thinking about. We've also been working with Lisk Boston and Commonwealth Kitchen. And so we have all of these different networks or these different organizations that all work with small businesses that have somewhat of a different focus. We all have some businesses that we have in common. And then, you know, I've been thinking, but what about the businesses that are not a part of any of these networks? What happens to them? So the businesses that are a part of at least one of these orgs, they're going to get something because they're going to have in one of us, they're going to have people working on their behalf to make sure they're getting resources in front of them. So the thing I would say is please know that whatever feels kind of like immediately in your grasp, you actually have there. Boston is a resource-rich city, and so what you want to try to figure out is what's the network of your people, however you define that, right? So if that's just okay, Black business owner, that's one network. As I said, if it's Black business owner who's concerned about the environment, that's another network. So I think it's super important. I think. Hopefully that's something that businesses are emerging with, that if they are not a part of some group that's looking out for them, that's really important. They shouldn't be going this alone. And then the second thing I would say is this is part of what I think sometimes can make being an entrepreneur, being a business owner lonely or isolating, is you can be hard on yourself. Failure occurs. And so, when I was talking about kind of like the 2016 businesses, I think the other interesting thing about Ujima and the opportunity that we have is we have an opportunity, I think, to really educate people on the ins and out of businesses in a way that's not mystical. So I talked about Boat and Bike School and the owner saying, you know, I'm actually not interested in this anymore. And that's a reality. That's just real. So that's not some like big looming failure on his part. And oh my gosh, what should we do now? There's a crisis. That happens. You know, business, you know, sometimes you start out with a passion for something. You've got the passion, you've got the drive, you've got the resources, you can make it happen for a while. And then one of those things changes. It's not a personal reflection. So I think that's important because businesses are going to have to make they already have had to, and they will continue to have to make hard decisions right now. Some businesses have had to say, do I try to stick this out and get to the other side of this and then see what happens? We've, in all of the orgs that I mentioned, in all of our conversations, we've said for some businesses, the best decision for them is to shut down. That actually is the best decision. And it's not a personal failing. So I think those would be the two that I would say.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. People are not alone, and you can still sustain your business. We're going to get through this pandemic, y'all. Every day is a new day.
So Nia, I wanted to kind of go a 180 and kind of ask you something else. I know you said you traveled, you studied in Sydney, Australia. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how can the United States, the government and the people that are setting these policies related to labor in America, what can they learn from some of these these other countries out there?
Everything.
Right. Are we talking about our current government, or are we talking about a more idealized version of a competent
current
government?
Current
government. All of the above.
You said current government?
Yeah, we can keep it there. But we don't have to
that's it.
Overall, because I think there's things that are changed, some policies have been set in place that are still there, whether you know, previously or not. So it can be kind of like an overall and a broad spectrum to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing question. Here's one thing I think I'm gonna. So the thing that's coming to mind, and I don't know how the two of you are kind of tuning into this election. Well, I mean, I know Bernadine, we have conversations regularly, so I do know you're thinking about November, but you know, I don't know who kind of like your candidates were, so to speak, or are. But Bernie Sanders, we know he identifies as a democratic socialist. And he would often, in his rhetoric, kind of reference countries like Sweden and Denmark. So countries, you know, that, you know, like Canada sometimes comes up, for example, when we're talking about healthcare. So basically what I'm thinking of are countries that have a strong social safety net. We can definitely learn from. And then on that note, I would even say if we can learn from our past, the U.S. can learn from its past. So when we look at, for example, you know, all of the things that are coming up with the pandemic, so essential workers without healthcare, and so they're going to work. Essential workers without a living wage, and so they're going to work. Essential workers without paid sick time, and so they're going to work. The trouble that people are having accessing unemployment. These are all results of a very, very weak social safety net. And so if we could look at those countries that have been able to do it, and really it's a matter of political will. Yes, you know, you look at those countries, taxes are high, but you see where those taxes go. They go to providing again some type of safety net where, you know, the bottom isn't gonna just completely drop out. You know, should you kind of fall on hard times or face hard choices. So that's one thing. And again, that's in our past, because at one point we did have a strong social safety net, and that's kind of eroded over the years. The thing to point out that's important, though, when we kind of look at your Swedens and your Denmarks, for example, is they are largely homogenous populations. So we can't necessarily divorce the political will from the fact that we're looking at countries where white people are talking about white people. And so, you know, this is not such a country, and definitely, you know, white supremacy, racism, anti-Blackness plays into or are large contributing factors into the fact that this country does not pour resources into a social safety net, because the thinking is, well, certain people who are going to get fat, and I don't want them to get it, and so then we're not going to have it at all.
Not the ones that we want to help. It's not our type. It's not our area, not our lane, right? Ways of separation rather than.
One thing I wanted to actually ask you on top related to that real quick is, so what do you say to the people that say, well, you know, you have these countries like Sweden that you're talking about that, you know, are much smaller in population and size compared to the United States. We have over 300 million people, and you're looking at these other countries are, you know, 20, 30 million people living there. It makes it much easier to scale up these type of resources for them.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I would say just a matter of degree, you know. So that's what I was saying. Like, yep, they definitely have high tax rates. Yeah, because that's, you know, because that's an argument that comes up too. But that's the thing, is like, so they have high tax rates. They have the base that they have that you've mentioned, which is the population. We have a larger base, so we have a larger base. We have more resources if we actually try to get those resources, but we don't. So that's what I would say. And again, I think it's less a matter of the size of the country, and I do think it's more a matter of the homogeneity of the population. I think that is where America gets stuck.
Okay. I'd also say, and the intent and the transparency of where we're looking to go, right? And so I think it's like, I think oftentimes we see a lot of efforts and ideas come up, and it's like, oh, it's open to everyone. And then it's just like, oh, but you have to, you know, but you didn't know to show up to this info session. And because you didn't show up to this info session, you're disqualified. But then you know that there's a group of people who wouldn't have access to knowing that there was an info session to begin with. And so, like, we create pathways, but also strategically develop strategies to keep people out of these pathways or these avenues of achieving certain resources and being priorities or true constituents who could be considered for certain things. And I think we don't do a good job being very open and honest about. Oh yeah, you know, we're just not outwardly racist, so we just hold it. We hide it. So I'm sitting here trying to be like, how do I say we are just operating under racism still?
And honesty is the word. Exactly. That's the thing. That's what I say. All we have to do is look to our past, right? Because when we think about the creation of the middle class in America, that was a deliberate, intentional. There was political will behind that. You know, so that wasn't just you know, all of a sudden magically everyone in America at the same time was able to achieve a certain standard of living. That was our government saying, we want to invest in these communities. And then we saw, to your point, Bernadine, how that played out. We saw who got what. So the GI Bill, not evenly distributed. Black people were restricted from that. So when there were, you know, very intentional campaigns to increase home ownership across America.
Yep. Red zoning, right? Exactly. So we have that. We talk about
that's the thing, is we can do it.
Slavery, right? Why did we abolish it? Who abolished it? Who made the passes? You know, what parts of the world were saying, like, we're going to open up our doors to you, and then under what grounds? And I mean, it's everywhere. I think about Haiti. You know, yesterday, the 18th was our Haitian Flag Day, and like first country to gain its independence, right? And it's still paying its debts for that, almost like criminalizing and just again criminalizing someone for obtaining their freedom, right? And so it's just like, good for you, but at the same time, like, you struggle with not having access to resources or supports or you know, like I don't know, like we can get into that on another segment, but you know, I think part of what we're looking at in what you were saying too, in like certain areas, like when whites are looking out for whites, that's a different conversation than creating systems that look out truly for all, right? And I think that goes further into explaining the importance of a program or an organization like the Ujima Project, because it's helping to empower Black people to pour into Black people for Black people. so that Black people don't need to. I mean, again, I always say my goal is for us to live in a world where, as great as the Ujima Project is, it's not needed, it's wanted, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that we're also thriving in worlds where we need to have these things in order for us to sustain ourselves. But the reality is that's messed up. Like, we should not have to have certain programs in order for us to be elevated or for us to be priorities, to just be able to thrive. Like, while I love the fact that brothers and sisters are getting together to own property, we shouldn't have to be living in a world where 10 people need to get together to own a building. Like, that's not cool. That's beautiful, but that's not okay. So I'm like, I need us to really have those kinds of conversations too. When we talk about our infrastructure and the results of racism and how it further perpetuates in various avenues.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I recorded a podcast with a woman named Jessica Norwood yesterday. And you'll recognize Jessica Norwood if you know about the Runway Project, which just hit Boston. But Jessica is the founder of Runway Project. She's from Mobile, Alabama. They first kind of debuted in Oakland. And last year, they just recently arrived in Boston. So they have a partnership, and they're under the, I won't say under, but they have a partnership with Berkshire Bank. And so we were recording a podcast yesterday because I got to make sure I attribute the quote properly to her, so nobody thinks this is me coming up with this, but this is her. But to your point, Bernadine, she said, she said, and actually maybe she attributed it to somebody else, but she was saying she was having a conversation with a friend of hers. I think this friend was a Black woman, and the Black woman said, like, have you thought about what it would look like to live outside of white supremacy and patriarchy? And that, like, when you say that, Bernadine, that's what this makes me think of, because, and I think that's what I'm getting at with when I say what drives me is that we really understand our worth, because to your point, so much of our lives are prescribed by like this lens. And so then to your point, what would it look like if we were out of that lens, right? So what would it look like? Yeah, if our lives were such that we woke up in the morning, and yeah, to your point, we didn't need a Ujima to say, okay, we're going to make sure we're very specifically investing in businesses owned by people of color because nobody else is going to invest in them. Can we conceive of that? How many of us can conceive of that? What that would look like and feel like,
And that's the world that I aspire for all of us to be able to create, because again, it's one thing to create something out of necessity, and it's something different to create it out of luxury and excess, right? Where you're just like, listen, I'm here because it's a good time. Like, I'm here because I want to do this, more so than it's just like, if we don't, then who will, right? And again, at what point can we, in our efforts to truly live in a liberated, more equitable and just world, can we really no longer be victims to our own systems too, in our own mental states of slavery and living in a state of impoverishment and struggle, and just always having to be, again, like, victims. And yes, we are survivors because we're resilient people for sure, but I don't even want us to have to consider ourselves as resilient. Like, I love it, but I hate it. I'm like, listen, if I'm described as a resilient Black person one more time, I'm like, because I'm tired. I'm like, I don't want to be resilient and driven. And I mean, I do want to still be driven. I'm not trying to like not do anything, but you know what I mean, right? Like, for all of us, like, leaving a platform for the collective, which we love, and we're grateful to have you. And I'm going to end off by having you share where people can support you and stay connected with you. But I'm like, even for us, we're like highlighting dope people of color who are doing phenomenal things. Why? Because no one's highlighting the dope people of color who are doing phenomenal things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, word, I can't wait to my podcast, but I'm like, damn, like, this is crazy. Like, if we don't create these pathways in these spaces, like, who's going to do it for us, right? But again, Ujima talking about the importance of wrapping it up for folks so that they know the importance of, prioritizing where you put your dollars, building in coalition and community with one another, and truly placing value in that, and not looking at your Black people as competition, but looking at them as allies and folks that you can really invest in and collaborate with for the legacy of everyone's vision, not just your own and not just them, but us and the true collective. So for those those of you who don't know, Ujima is a Swahili word which stands for collective work and responsibility all together within itself. So I'm gonna need y'all to understand the importance of coming in collectively and collaborating for the essence of humanity, particularly in the Black and Brown community. So
yes.
yeah.
With that being said,
What did you say?
now that with that being said, Nia, where can
Right.
follow
Where can
you?
support?
Website, number, anywhere they can go so they can get some more information
Yeah.
on the Ujima Project.
Cool. Yeah. So we have a website. It is ujimaboston.com. Ujima is UJIMA. So www.ujimaboston.com. It's a cool website. That's where you can learn about our fund. We have a video on there where we kind of take you through the whole ecosystem and all of the things that you can vote on and do as a member. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram, Ujima Boston. We're on Twitter, Ujima Boston. I have to say, I have a communications team that is fantastic. Sierra Peters runs our Instagram. It's amazing. I'm too old. I barely know how to use Instagram. What'd you say?
What's the Instagram tag?
Ujima Boston. Claudia Friedel runs our Twitter. Also amazing. That's also Ujima Boston.
Okay.
We're trying to get our act together on LinkedIn, so I would say wait a few weeks. But you'll see us on LinkedIn, and there are all sorts of ways to support us. We meet every single Wednesday. Before it was in person, now it's on Zoom. So if you go to our website, you can join our mailing list. We send a weekly email. We have weekly meetings. Please join us. We have our meetings. We try to do political and financial education at the same time. You can invest if you like. So again, I said a minimum $50 donation. So if you want to learn more about investment, go to our site, contact our fund management team. You can donate. We really try to create all sorts of different ways to plug in. We'll be doing some events soon online. But yeah, kind of see all the different things that we're offering, pick one and start there is what I say.
You will have the gala coming up, right?
Yes, thank you. So June 25th, we have an online, thank you, Bernadine. We have an online gala with Union Capital Boston. So Union Capital Boston have been doing this online gala for a few years now. We have a really cool collaboration with them where they kind of have a reward system for civic engagement. And so for their members, if they get to the silver tier, they can either redeem their points for a $75 Visa gift card, or they could say, instead of the $75, give me $25 and make a $50 investment for me in the Ujima Fund. So it's a very cool collaboration. We've gotten quite a few investors in the Ujima Fund through that route. And so last year we said, let's do this online gala together next year. But this is before the pandemic. You know, I'm like, Union Capital Boston is brilliant for that because that's very little overhead, mostly net. You know, let's do this online gala. And now everybody in the world has an online gala. But so we're kind of being tongue-in-cheek about it. It's called Gala Virtuale. And the theme is The Wiz. Sheena Collier is the MC. Yeah, and if you go to our Facebook invite, we're kind of dropping little breadcrumbs every day leading up to it. So it should be a lot of fun.
Well, we'll definitely try to do our best to support as a collective. I will do my best to be there for Know Your True Speaker Shoots for sure. I'm super excited to again have you. And just again, continue to track away with all the work that you're doing with the Ujima Project. The community needs you and the community appreciates you. And we as the collective also do as well. So thank you so much for being here. And
thank you, Bernadine. And NIC, so great to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So cool. That was Nia. All right, live from the Ujima Project, sharing more about her resources, the work that she does. If you all don't know much about the Ujima Project, please check it out because, again, they're doing phenomenal work for the Boston community, for business owners, entrepreneurs. See, you know, if you're looking to be invested in, if you're looking to invest, if you're looking to have an impact and a stake in what goes on in our city, particularly in the Black and Brown community, that this is the space to be, or the Black community, rather, this is the place to be. So thank you again, Nia, for sharing sharing your insights and your work. And again, providing more resources for Boston. So stay connected.
Yes, y'all. And that was our show for this evening. We always want to thank all of our audience. We want to thank Nia again. Thank you for coming on and sharing everything that you needed to share tonight about the Ujima Project. But we want to thank the fans, everybody that's going online, everybody that listens to the podcast, for interacting with us, anybody that follows us on social media. Thank you. Continue to share, continue to follow us, continue to engage with us each and every week. Your support means a lot to us. Trust me, we try to respond to everybody. We try to engage with everyone as much as we can. So thank you from the whole collective, every single one of us.
Absolutely. And if you're looking to continue to stay connected with us beyond Facebook and YouTube, both of which you can find us at The Urban Collective Show, please also check us out on Instagram. We are accessible at The Urban Collective Show. And then we are also on Twitter, where we occasionally tweet to all of you. And you can find us there at the UC Show 3. All right. So again, that's it, folks. It's Bernadine Truth, and I'm checking out.
Yes, and we always like to end the show with a motivational quote. So for this week, the quote is from Kristen Armstrong, and it goes a little bit like this. Times of transition are strenuous, but I love them. They are an opportunity to purge, rethink priorities, and be intentional about new habits. We can make our new normal any way we want. Again, that was from Kristen Armstrong. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for watching. Tell a friend to tell a friend, share the show. We will catch you next week. Peace.
Bye. Later.